Joining us on the How Did You podcast today is Simon Balmain. He's a community manager at Twitter, but is one of the pillars of Monzo Bank and has been there for a while, and then later went on to Sphere and then has progressed onto Twitter. He's been at home since 2016, so we're going to join him from his home. How are you doing, Simon?
I'm great. Thank you for having me. Really good to be here.
You have been quite an important role at Monzo, which you later then progressed onto Sphere, and you've later progressed onto Twitter. Obviously, Sphere got acquired by Twitter, and you have essentially been their third hire as a community manager, but the kind of a forefront of it. How have you found Twitter communities? Because it was something that grew out of Spaces, and it's been a vital part of Twitter recently.
I'll give you a bit of backstory. Twitter first started talking about communities in early 2021. I believe it was their investor day. I think it was February 2021. And I was still working at Sphere at the time. Obviously, later on, we would get acquired by Twitter. But Twitter communities is very, very similar to what we were building at Sphere. At Sphere, we had, I would say, several advantages actually over Twitter in that it was a new company with a very modern tech stack, a lot of autonomy, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, what we didn't have was hundreds of millions of users, right? So we had our sort of decent base of early cohorts, early adopters, whatever you want to call them, that we were building up over time. And we had what we felt was a really good product. The sort of problem becomes you get to a point where you're building a product to a certain standard. And then even if you have solid investor funding, which we did, you get to a point and you realize, wow, like getting to user scale in this day and age is really, really hard. So we basically thought, well, do we go out and get more funding, or what are our options? What's on the table? And around that same time, it turned out that Twitter was very interested in acquiring us. They'd obviously seen what we were doing. They knew Nick, our CEO. They realized we were thinking the same way about the kind of product that we were building and what they were building with communities. And then the acquisition happened late last year. I think 22 people out of 30 people that worked at Sphere ended up coming over to Twitter, mostly to work on communities. And it's been great. It's been great. The product had been launched in a sort of early beta or alpha or whatever you want to call it in towards the end of 2021. So, right around the time that we all started at the company. And it gave our team the sort of manpower, firepower, whatever you want to call it, to really double down in Q1 of this year to build a really strong foundation and a really strong core for this product. Because what we shipped was very much like kind of like an MVP, I guess. And it needed a lot of strengthening. And being able to do that in Q1, so I'm talking about like some of the things we've shipped include like Android support, because initially it was mostly iOS and web. Request to join, which is instead of having open access, people can request to join a community and then the admin can approve them. And a bunch of other stuff along those kind of lines. And that puts us in the position for now, Q2, being able to look at some what we call big bets, which is really kind of ambitious stuff. It might be sort of changing the whole way the feature kind of looks or feels or works, or introducing new kinds of actions that don't exist on the timeline. So yeah, give me 1 second. I'm going to mute my Slack because I forgot to do that.
It's always fun working from home, and I can understand how it was nice to see kind of Sphere grow from, like you said, at 22 employees to being all over to Twitter. Like, it was only recent that kind of happened, that you announced that you were moving into the Twitter sphere, I guess. But we've had a brief interaction on Twitter, and you say there's a lot more to come. Is there anything you can share? Because I guarantee some of these Twitter applications for communities that you're getting in the high numbers. Like, you see them just springing out of nowhere for relevant different topics. Like, there's one that I see quite a lot of is KSI and all the Sidemen's one, because obviously I'm from the UK. That
Yep.
has grown massively. I know there's been quite a few issues recently with, say, the amount of numbers saying that there's a load of people left when they haven't. But I guess that's what you got to expect with a new feature to such a wide user base platform, like you say.
Yeah, I mean that's it. I think one of the things that I'm really enthusiastic about is that every time we look at the dash of what are the most popular communities or any of the other metrics we look at, because popularity and number growth is not necessarily the only important metric. But regardless of what we're kind of tracking, we find that there's always new communities in that list. So ones that have popped up in the last 2 to 4 to 6 weeks, like being very, very active or having great growth or whatever else it may be. And that's always changing. So I feel like if that list was always stagnant and it was always like whatever had launched the earliest was in there, then I'd feel like we were doing something wrong. Because that's not happening, I feel like we're very much on the right track. It means that people can really see that it's possible to start something brand new on Twitter right now and experience like growth and success. And that's really important to us.
I've seen them also being used for like people who want to share their wordles and it doesn't want to clog up their user feed, and it's something completely different because it allows, like I said in my tweet to you, it's exactly what Twitter needed in my opinion. It allows differentiation because it's kind of like you've now got two feeds. Like if you want to look at something more tailored to you, which Trends was doing fantastically, you can look at a specific community. But if you want to look at everybody you follow, that's great as well.
Well, the way I see it is that a big part of our focus at the company is around this concept of decentralization. And people think of that in different ways, and because it can mean a lot of different things. So when you're talking about initiatives that we have going, like Blue Sky, that's like a technical implementation of what a decentralized platform would look like. Whereas where Twitter could be a client of that decentralized platform, what we're doing with communities is kind of decentralizing the governance. So the admins and the moderators, whoever is in control of any community, like you set the rules of engagement, like you decide what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And that's something that you just can't do on the timeline. Like, you can't stop people posting movie spoilers on the timeline, but if you're relying on a community about that movie or set of movies, like let's say you're in a Marvel community, then it's perfectly acceptable to say, don't post any Marvel spoilers in this community or we're going to ban you or remove you from the community. So that's the kind of thing that you can do with this that's just not possible elsewhere on the platform.
Yeah, and I think it's exactly what Twitter needed. I mention it time and time again, but it's getting to the point where, although Twitter is huge, I feel as if it's getting bigger.
Mm. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's it allows you to differentiate. I guess the closest comparison is kind of like a subreddit in a way.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think Reddit is definitely an example of a community platform that has kind of operated along some of these methods to a different degree. Discord as well, but we're not looking at Reddit and Discord and saying like let's be them. Like we're trying to keep this uniquely Twitter. Like any good company, we want to learn from the things that have worked for other people and what hasn't worked for other people, but ultimately like we're going to make our own decisions about what our product should look like in the way that makes sense for us.
I can completely understand that. On a personal level, did you ever think you'd end up here? Because obviously you have progressed massively throughout your career. Like you started off at the BBC as just an intranet coordinator, then moved to Monzo. And like I said at the start, you were quite a founding pillar to the point where you had even put a personal message on your departure of Monzo on the form. Where it basically said, here is a community message, and I've wrote a variant of this message to our internal Slack. But how did it feel to move on? Because like I say, you have progressed massively, and with how big you helped grow Monzo to, that must have been quite sad and quite euphoric to move on.
Yeah, but there's some context there. When I started at Monzo, there was about 40 people in the entire company. And I went to the early office at that time, which was, I don't know if you or anyone listening has ever seen the show Silicon Valley, the comedy show. It was very much like that. It was messy, beer cans, PlayStation, merchandise strewn all over the place, and like people just incessantly coding on laptops, and every morning meeting we had would end with like everyone in the team like doing like a high five in a circle. It was kind of funny to think back on. But during the course of me being there, which was a little under 4 years, by the time I left, there was over 1,500 people in at least 3 or 4, I can't even remember, different offices. And we'd grown to like millions and millions of customers. I'd personally been involved with setting up the first international office. So they sent me over to Vegas to set up the office there. Spent a few months out there doing that. And it was just different. It was, the company felt like it had been 3 or 4 different companies in the space of 4 years. When you scale that quickly, things change, and not always for the better. And what I found was that I found myself missing that early culture. Because I think, can you hear that in the background?
I can, but it's not an issue at all, honestly.
Weird pipes. I found myself missing that early culture because I think to be a good community manager, in a sense, it means you're often the ultimate like generalist. Like most people have a specialism that's their day-to-day job, and then they might have a general knowledge of other things. When you're a community manager and you represent a company, I find like being the ultimate generalist like is your specialism, right? It might sound a bit paradoxical, but people see you as the voice of a company and they expect you to know everything about the company. And the more you can know, and the more you can zoom out and kind of almost see the company in the same way that your CEO might, the more effective you can be at that job. And when a company grows as quickly as Monzo did, they sort of, there's almost less room for that kind of generalism, and at the same time it's more needed than ever. So this was the position I found myself in. I was like, I feel like I'm doing really important work, but the way that the company is changing and moving, I don't feel supported in the way that I used to. And a lot of the people that I considered my support networks had already gone at that point. So, you know, when you go from starting there with 40 people, and maybe in the first 6 months it went up to 100 people, and you sort of make those relationships and you pick and choose, you know, who your 10, 15, 20 closest people are. A few years down the line, you're almost certainly going to find that a good amount of those people have left because you've been there so long. And then new people have less context about what you did at the beginning and the foundations of that stuff, and it just becomes different. So yeah, I was frustrated. I decided to, actually, it's funny. I got I started speaking to a lady named Kiri, who was the HR person at Sphere, and they were sort of, you know, having these early recruiting conversations with me, and I actually said I'm happy where I am. I think this was towards the end of 2019. And then about 3 or 4 months later, I realized that I wasn't. And luckily, I'd left an open relationship with her, and I hadn't said, nah, I'm not interested, like, you know, like I would do if somebody approached me with a company that I really hated, and I'd just be like, no, never. It wasn't like that. So I reached back out and I'm like, hey, you know, things have changed. Let's talk, see, you know, tell me a little bit more about what's happening at Sphere. And so we went from there, and I ended up going to the London office, meeting Nick, Tomasz, and the rest of the team there. And what I was enthusiastic about at that time was getting back to that small startup kind of vibe, having gone through this massive Monzo growth scale. And, Sphere had about 30 people, and I came in at quite a high role there. So I had like a lot of autonomy. I felt very supported. So my concern, I guess, when 18 months later, or however long it was, moving into Twitter, was like, wow, am I ready to go back into like a massive company? And what I found was that I think when you're a small company and you scale the way that Monzo did, and you end up having all these problems, at some point, if you continue to be successful and you continue to hire the right people, you sort of fix that, right? Like, that's not a permanent state of affairs. And so with Twitter being a company that's, a decade older than Monzo was, that scaling and messiness and problematic stuff that probably caused people to leave, like, that happened a long time ago, right? So it's not where the company is now. So I don't feel blocked or not supported by big company stuff or red tape or bureaucracy, because there are ways to cut through that, because this company has been around for a lot longer. So yeah, it's kind of weird. I fully expected that I would work in small startups for a long time. But I love being here. I love Twitter. I've been on Twitter since 2007. And I always said it was my favorite social media platform. I didn't expect to work here. I met my girlfriend on Twitter. So
wow. Okay.
I've had opportunities, personal life, professional life, like passions. Like, I've had a lot of opportunities that have come through Twitter, and I've always appreciated that and used the service like a great deal. Didn't think that I would end up here, but yeah, happy about it.
Well, I appreciate you opening up so much, because, like I say, your form post is quite a long one, and you mentioned your next steps, but since that's happened, you've had further next steps, and it's quite an influential path you've taken, because, like you say in this post, which I'll allude back to quickly, it says self-awareness is a trait that I highly value, and I think that is quite an important role, because it only took you 3 to 4 months, but those 3 to 4 months changed your life dramatically. Like you say, you've gone from a company that was started small, and it also says here, with very heated matches of worms, to then having Monzo grow to crazy heights, and then leave during a pandemic to join Twitter, which is a whole crazy feat in itself, and basically turn your life around. And Twitter, like you say, has been an important role in your life for a while. So I'm intrigued to know, are you yourself in any Twitter communities?
Yeah, loads, of course. So I have 2 Twitter accounts. I have my work one and I have my personal one. My personal one is under my stage name because I'm a musician. Before I was at Monzo, I was signed to several major record labels with my band and released albums, toured all over the world, festivals, all kinds of stuff. So that my main one is sort of the account that was set up primarily for music. And so in that one, I'm mostly in music communities for artists I like. So I'm an admin on that one of a Prince community. Prince is one of my favorite artists of all time. I'm a moderator in a Michael Jackson community, another one of my favorites. I'm in a Janet Jackson community and a handful of others. On my work account, which is obviously more like tech focused, I'm in about like 20 or 30, I think. Like loads of different ones, like gaming ones, like operating system ones, so like Apple and Google and stuff like that. I can't even remember. I'm in so many. I'm in a Doctor Who one, which is really funny. There's a lot of cool memes in there. Lots of different things.
I was going to ask about that, but as you mentioned it, why not? Let's bring it in. Your LinkedIn mentions community management, web design, social media management, audiovisual production, and the music industry as a professional vocalist and songwriter.
Yeah.
You've worked with lots of different labels: Sony, BMG, Universal, Virgin EMI, and you, like it says here, you've produced award-winning documentaries for the likes of BBC One Extra and XFM, and also guest lectured at several universities on the music business. How do you have time to do this?
uh, I don't sleep much and I have ADHD, so I'm always going. No, I think it's just about like time management. It's not always easy, but I find that it's about working smart and not necessarily like working hard. Like if you work effectively, then you can do more things in a way that if you weren't working effectively, you'd easily run into burnout or find that you're spreading yourself too thin. So yeah, it's kind of like that. I mean, musically, like it's my family business basically. Like 3 of my cousins are like multi-platinum artists, producers, songwriters. So that's I grew up in studios and they run their own record label. So that's always been a constant all around my life. So I feel like I can almost like dip in and out of that like whenever I want because it's always ongoing around me. Yeah, documentaries. I made a bunch, award-winning ones, BBC ones, XFM. I've got a couple on the back burner at the moment that are in various stages of production. But again, it's something that I feel like I can pick up and put down as needed. Yeah, I just like to do a lot of different things, I guess.
It's astounding because, like you say, it's not like you're doing a small role at Twitter, or I did a small role at Sphere, or I did a small role at Monzo, because it's crazy the growth that we're going to see. And it sounds strange to say this, but Twitter communities is, I guess, at a small stage because it's new, and it's going to be exciting what it grows to with the user base of Twitter. But you've also had the opportunity to give your personal highlight of walking through Prince's unreleased music vault at the University of Minnesota.
Yes, I gave a talk at the University of Minnesota about Prince's lengthy unreleased catalog of music, of which a decent amount has come out since his passing, but there is still dozens of unreleased albums, thousands of unreleased songs. Our grandchildren will be hearing new Prince music at this point, to be honest. So he was a workaholic.
And I guess that goes with you as well. You never want to stop. So I'm going to ask you. I'm guessing, with the blurred background, are either surrounded by a load of technology or a load of literature. What's your favourite piece of technology?
It's a mix of both, to be honest. In my background, it's music, literature, technology, everything. My favorite piece of technology. Depends how you define technology. Are we talking software? Are we talking hardware? There's so many routes you could go there.
I'm now intrigued because I'm sure for software piece, and with no qualms or hard words, I'm sure it's not Slack, because as soon as you're ready to turn off Slack and the workday's done, that's gone. So software-wise, is it going to be something like your Pro Tools, your Logic, or is it something like Ableton or anything like that? And I'm guessing hardware, I'm going to make a prediction now because I've led myself down this path. I assume you are probably a synthesizer guy.
Yes, I am. I have a Mini Nova right next to me, which is cool. It's a good synth. If I zoomed out my camera, you'd be able to see it, but it's literally to my left. I feel like pro audio software is a bit stagnant. I don't think there's much interesting stuff happening with it. It hasn't really changed in a long time. Like, I guess Ableton is probably the biggest sort of change to workflow that people have made in recent years. I still wouldn't say I really love it. I think more so there's more interesting stuff happening in terms of plugins. So you see more audio plugins coming out that utilize AI and stuff like that. So my cousin just showed me this really awesome one that he started using where it analyzes your entire drum library and then kind of arranges it by sound and direction. So instead of sort of sorting through millions of folders of hits and loops, like you just click somewhere on the plugin, and then if you want something thicker, you go like lower, and you want something thinner, you go like higher, and it becomes much easier to create a drum track really quickly. So I thought that was cool, and there's more interesting things happening with machine learning and AI in the plugins than there is in sort of the main software. Yeah, so I don't know if I really have a favorite piece of software right now. I'm just looking at like everything I have installed. No, probably not. I think Hey is really good for email, hey.com. It's pricey, but they're the first ones that I think have really made a dent in this like decades old problem of us all using terrible email clients. Probably the first since Gmail, I would say, actually, that have kind of made a big difference there. Hardware wise, yeah, I have a few cents. Again, like I do have emotional connections to some of them, but I don't know that I'd say that I love them, because I kind of just see them as tools to get a job done. So, and more often than not, like you find yourself using soft synths anyway, because you have way more options. So hardware wise, I'd probably say if I was going by like the thing that I use the most at the moment, I'd actually say it's my PS5.
You're a PS5 man. Oh no.
Yeah. I love it. I think Sony, they've knocked it out of the park. It's a brilliant piece of engineering. It looks beautiful. It runs beautifully. The software is incredible. I think they've done a really good job.
What games are we playing?
I just finished the DLC of Lost Judgment, which originally came out last year, but the DLC only just came out. And it's a whole new separate story. I think I really love their whole series. It's called RGG Studio. So Judgment and Lost Judgment are the spin-offs of the Yakuza series, which is all kind of like dark, gritty underworld Japan stuff that I really love. My favorite video game of all time is Shenmue. So Yakuza was kind of, it's very much inspired by it. The creator of the Yakuza series originally worked on Shenmue. So there's a lot of kind of shared DNA there. But the Yakuza people have brought out like, I don't know, 9 or 10 different games in the last decade. So they're quite prolific, and they're always very high quality. So I love them. Final Fantasy VII Remake, incredible. Waiting for part 2 on that, whenever that comes out. That's another one I love. Yeah, I guess those are my favorites on PS5 right now. Waiting for The Last of Us Part 3, because Part 1 and 2 just...
I'm yet to finish part 1 of that. I think I should probably. I need to get onto that. But
The Last of Us.
Yeah, I've started part 1, and to be fair, I can't remember much of it, so I'm tempted to stream that or play that one time. But I'm glad that part 3 is on its way, because I wasn't aware of that.
Well, they haven't officially announced it. I think the latest rumors are that they are working on a script. I probably won't see it for, I don't know, 3-4 years, but I'm sure it'll be worth the wait whenever it does come out.
Yeah, I just hope it doesn't have the weight of GTA 6 or anything like that. But
yeah, that's the thing. I think this is the problem with gaming. Like some of the companies, they do so well and they become so expansive that they just release these just ridiculous, like weighty things that they can not follow up for a decade. Like I struggle with Red Dead 2. Like it was just too much. I just can't. I just think about playing more of it and think, yeah, I really enjoyed that bit, but like, wow, like I have to sink like so much time into this thing.
Like, is it Elden Ring at the moment? It's like however long it takes forever, but I don't know.
I don't even have time to like even think about Elden Ring. I'm in the midst of Persona 5, and I didn't realize when I started it that that's like 100+ hours long as well. I think I'm like 25 hours into it.
I swear it's now a competition or something like that. But
It really
going
is.
back, going back to the podcast, what was life like growing up as a child? Did you find it like quite difficult to get into being able to do what you wanted to do, or did you always have that mindset? Because, like you say, on your LinkedIn, you started off at the BBC as a maintenance and internal BBC platform gateway kind of thing, and then you moved your way up in Monzo. Was that always the goal, and did you kind of see BBC as a way in, or did you just allow your career to develop as the world develops?
Um, well, to give you some context, I had a very traumatic childhood, so I'm not going to go into too many details about right now, but it meant that I I struggled, and I actually got expelled from school when I was 16, um, because of acting up from all the stuff that I'd been through and all this kind of PTSD and undiagnosed neurodivergences. Um, but I got a record deal within 6 months with an independent label, made an album that did really well, got signed to Sony within a year.
Fair play.
So when all the people at my kind of school were, they'd open the papers and they'd see me in it and stuff, and I was pretty happy about that. And particularly the teachers who laughed at me when I said that I was going to be a musician, that old story, and then proved them wrong. So music business was always my primary thing. When I worked at the BBC, I didn't really consider that my career. It was just a job. And it when I left there, it kind of coincided with the sort of economic crash that happened in 2008, 2009. So that there weren't really opportunities in tech back then, particularly unless you lived in major hubs like London or New York, San Francisco. So I focused on doing music. I lived in the US for a while. I was kind of back and forth between here and there, touring quite a lot. The music industry, it really changed a lot, and it became a lot more difficult with streaming to make a living, really. So I kind of thought, community manager and community management is a very recent development in tech. Let's just put that out there. But for people that are really passionate about it, we've been doing it before it was a thing in tech, right? We've been doing it for 20 years. Like I used to moderate forums about like hip hop and R&B and like funk music when I was like 13. Like we're talking like V-Bulletin and PHPBB and like all these old school like platforms from the 90s. Like
that's a throwback.
Yeah, it's a real throwback. So it took the sort of professional world a bit longer to catch up, but when it did become a thing, I was like, well, this is what I already do. This is what I did as a passion. This is what I did being in a band that always tried to be self-reliant in making our own materials and marketing our own stuff and building up our fan community and all that kind of stuff. So it was just a natural thing to move into. And it also coincided with companies realizing that it wasn't necessarily a good thing to only hire people that like live within like 20 miles of where your office is or whatever it might be. Because a lot of jobs that I could have done, in the years before I started at Monzo, they would always be like just London based, like office based, and I was not interested in doing that. So when I found Monzo, I realized that they had community values. They already had a community forum in the very early days. I sort of started investigating, posting on it myself, and then I realized that they were also remote friendly. I was like, this makes sense. I might as well get in touch and see what their vibe is. So yeah, it's kind of gone from there. That's a good question. I would say one of the best things that I've learned and been able to do, and it is easier said than done, but it's not impossible to do, is fighting this urge we have to overweight negativity or hostility or dwell on it, when in reality most people are getting far more positive sentiment from whatever or whoever is around them, be that family, friends, colleagues, people that you talk to online that you share common interests with or whatever. You're getting 99% of that, and maybe 1% of the time somebody says something nasty to you or says something that's not true or calls you, rude names or whatever it might be. And human nature is that people tend to like really hyper focus on that. And I tune it out. I've managed to let it roll off me. Like, I'm not a robot, and it doesn't, like, not to say that it doesn't affect me at all. Like, I'm still a human being with emotions, but I find that I can pretty quickly get over that feeling and remember and center myself with the fact that that is just a small trickle of something going on that is actually completely overpowered by everything else. Like, all the positives, all the people that I love and that love me, and that are happy to, help me level up or whatever it might be, or give me support. I have an infinite abundance of that, and things that people say they don't know you can never even get close to breaking down that wall. So why do we have this human nature to like get so upset at this random thing? It doesn't make sense. So yeah, that's my piece of advice. Like, try and be zen, try and center yourself, remember everything that's around you, and don't take seriously things that people say who are missing 99.9% of the context around something. And also operate with empathy, because maybe more often than not, that's the person who's struggling or having a bad day or having a bad life or has had some shit stuff happen to them, and they react by just lashing out at whatever and whoever's around them. I don't know, right? So it's better for me to assume that that's possibly the case and not worry about it. I've literally tried to, sometimes I've reached out to people that have been real assholes to me online and be like, you don't know me, so I'm wondering why you said this, and if you want to get to know me, like, I'm open to that. And I've tried to olive branch like people that have been real assholes, and sometimes it works, right? Sometimes they actually say, yeah, you know what, I was wrong for that. I was having a bad day, like, you actually seem like a nice guy, like, whatever. So it's interesting. Human nature is very interesting. I'm always around if people want to talk to me on Twitter. It is my job after all, so